Welcome everybody to this afternoon's Enriching Literacy Practice in Foundation to Year 8 webinar. This afternoon, or this evening's focus, as you can see on the screen and as you know, is on formative assessment. My name is Danny Hindman. I think it might have Daniel. I can't get that changed. I'm definitely a Danny. I'm your host for this webinar series. Last week, we went into great depth around the workshop model, and while we'll be building on the content from last week's webinar, if you're joining us for the first time, that will be fine. You don't need to have attended last week. They are standalone, although they do have many connections as well. We also have the third part of our webinar on September the 8th, which is via a panel. So hopefully you've had a good day today, whether that, we've had many challenges in Victoria over the last 2 years. So whether you are in remote learning or snapping in and out of remote learning, I hope you're coping as best as possible. I had an educator earlier in the week say, Danny, I hope you're trudging through lockdown with grace and perseverance. And there's definitely a lot of perseverance, and I'd like to think that on the good days there's plenty of grace, but I hope that is the same for you with grace and perseverance. So here is how the best way to contact me. I did have a number of educators sort of email me after last Wednesday, whether it might be for a link or something that I referenced. This is the best way to touch base. So I will have my details again at the end of this evening's webinar, but that is the best way to touch base. Before we get too far, we'd like to acknowledge the many traditional lands upon which we gather this afternoon and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm on Woorayl land, as where I'm placed right at this moment. I talked about this last week. I think there is the danger of acknowledgement of country becoming a bit token, and I think schools all, as far as I know, do acknowledgement of country. But if we are acknowledging country, then it does need to be reflected. The perspectives and stories of our Indigenous people need to be reflected. So that is something that I'm talking about a bit this year, and I'll leave that with you to ponder. So our agenda for this afternoon, this evening, there's a fair bit there. So last week we looked at a number of videos, and we're definitely going to be doing that again. I think everybody loves to hear and see what other schools are doing. So the first part you're going to be hearing from me, and I'm going to be talking sort of around the education state, some lead-in around formative assessment, and then we'll see formative assessment within the workshop model and some testimonials. Now, we've only got 90 minutes, and we only had 90 minutes last week. But these are the videos. So I guess where I'm going with this is there's only so much that we can cover, and we are sort of having a bit of a broad brush coverage. So Coburn Primary School, we're going to hear about the great work they're doing in relation to phonics. Woorayl Primary School in relation to reading. Kewarra Peter 12 in the secondary space, where we're hearing about reading. Clarinda Primary School around readers' notebooks, and Camberwell South Primary will round things off in terms of writing. So I have the privilege of working with all of these schools directly in some shape or form, and one of the things that I'm going to build on shortly is, these schools are really emerging, or they're really on top of their game, and there's recent finalists in the Victorian Excellence Awards. There's recent winners of the Victorian Excellence Awards, and there's at least one 2021 nomination in amongst. So, but what I would say is some of these schools have been on this journey for as far as I know, the highest is around 11 or 12 years, which is a really long time. And one of the messages from me is, we need to play the long game in education. And what you'll hear from these schools is how they're going about it. So, and it is what is possible. There's always more to learn. It doesn't matter how well you're going, and these schools aren't professing to be have no room for improvement. They're fully aware that there's always more. So, but I do think their stories are great for us to all learn from. Hence why they're included. Last week we had a Padlet, so you've got another one. Please, I will be giving you a couple of breaks through the 90-minute session, 2 3-minute breaks. That's where, obviously have a toilet stop, grab a cuppa, stretch your legs, get a break from the screen. It will count down for the 3 minutes. That probably is the best time to put some info into the Padlet. I will try and be as responsive as possible, although it's not easy. For anything that I don't get to that people have flagged in the Padlet, we do have the webinar panel, the third webinar, which is in the form of a panel on September the 8th, and we will use some of the information that's put into the Padlet to inform how we structure that panel. So anyway, that's the agenda. So, and one of the big themes through all of this is having high expectations and believing that we can achieve anything and everything. And for me, that sort of embodies the core and the foundation of the education state. Back when it was first rolled out, I was a principal. And time flies. It's hard to think that we're probably, I think, 7 years in. I'm not sure of my maths there. I think I'm not too far off if I haven't quite got that right. And so, I'm lucky enough to work in, COVID permitting, 3 other states in Australia and a territory. And my feedback would be we're really lucky to work in the system that we do. No system is perfect, but we do have an unrelenting focus within our system on building educator capacity, all with the goal in mind of lifting student outcomes. I'm also very proud and passionate about state education. All of my schooling was within our system, and then the opportunities I was provided within our system as an educator allows me to do the work that I do engage in today. You'll see bottom right-hand corner, professional learning communities. That is the element within the education state that I want to highlight. The pilot for that was 2015 or 2016, somewhere around there, and it really has had a big impact across the whole state. It's one of the core initiatives that has rolled out, and it is really the main initiative that connects so strongly to our focus this afternoon on formative assessment. In the videos that you'll see tonight, you will hear from schools that have really taken the initiative and made it their own. And what I would say is, I think if we pair it back, what these educators and what these schools do really well in relation to their PLCs is they hone in on what their students are doing well collectively. They also look at what do our students, what are their areas for improvement, and then crucially, importantly, what are we going to do about those areas for improvement? And so we need to tell our students all of the things that we're noticing that they're doing well as a collective group, as individuals, and that's why I've tried to break up this evening. We've got phonics, we've got reading in general, we've got readers' notebooks, which is crucial, and a little bit around writing and conferring. You'll see a fantastic example of Frank having a conference with little Teddy, so look forward to that. But what we want our educators to do with that PLC cycle is, we all know how limited for time we are, how often, particularly currently meeting in the same room, is challenging. So there's finite time available to us. So we want to collaborate, and we want to look at student work exactly how I just spoke about. What are students doing well? What are their areas for improvement? What's the, one or two areas that I'm really going to hone in on, and what am I going to do in relation to my teaching to target that? So we don't have the luxury of doing that, all day, every day. But that's the kind of thinking as educators we need to be constantly thinking about. We're awash with data, awash with assessment in our system. And it's really important that, if we're collecting that, that we're acting on it, that we're really responsive. And, PLCs is exactly how we want to do that, but we want to go further, and we want that to be the culture. We want that to be how we're thinking individually, that we challenging and supporting each other, that I've got a particular student or a particular cohort presenting in a particular way. What would you do? How would you respond? So that's probably, and like I said, the schools you're going to hear from this evening, I do have the privilege of working directly with, and they are lots of the conversations that we engage in, and along with what other information or data do we need to collect, to monitor whether we are hitting the mark or not. Let's keep rolling. So, talked about this last week as well, and I'm going to go from the bottom up. So the schools that you're hearing from, and we had the opportunity to hear from more schools last week than we can this week. A big shout out to Reed Clark. I'm not sure if Reed's logged in. Reed helped me produce the videos. But where a lot of this work has come from these schools is through the Basto Literacy Suite. And I think nearly all schools would have sent someone to literacy local leaders at some point over the last few years. And literacy local leaders last year reverted online, and that is really where this webinar series has stemmed from, and building on that. So there were people who wrote to me this week asking for the link to last year's literacy local leaders. But where I'm going with this is, that is the entry pathway. If you're a graduate, if it's your first sort of toe in the water for the literacy suite, that is the entry point. Enhancing literacy across secondary disciplines is new this year for our secondary colleagues. Literacy data assessment and practice, both primary and secondary, are the two courses that really reflect what we're talking about this afternoon, this evening. And pre-COVID, they were, quite innovative. They were before their time. They were the first courses through Basto that were completely online. And if you're really taken by the content in this webinar, I do recommend enrolling for next year in either of those courses, if you're primary or if you're secondary. And it always works best if you can enrol as a team, so that you can lead that learning back at school. And leading literacy is the mothership. So leading literacy is, they're all ambitious courses. Leading literacy is the #1 course that all of these, they're all complementary. If you want to get big bang for your buck, you take a really strong team to leading literacy, which is what the schools you're going to hear from this evening. Play the long game, get your culture around literacy, around learning, because there is always more to learn. There's, Dylan Willem, he's on record for saying there's more to learn in education than is possible in one lifetime. And we need to embrace that, not be paralysed by that. Just embrace the fact that there's always the opportunity to get better. So there's the literacy suite. And, just talking about Dylan Willem, he really is made a real market and niche for himself around formative assessment. And, the quote, "When teachers do formative assessment effectively, students learn at roughly double the rate than they do without it." And that's why we're all in the game. We might all have some difference of opinion from time to time, but what makes us tick as educators is we're there for our students. You know, we bleed for them. We we're passionate. You know, we want our students to grow and learn and have success. So if formative assessment, you know, roughly double the rate, then we there's too much happening in education. There's too much happening in schools. We need to make sure we keep the main thing the main thing. And formative assessment, I'm going to argue, is what should be the main thing in our schools. So a little bit of reading there. One of the things that you might want to write to me about, and you don't have to write to me, but one of the things that you might want to write to me about is some further reading around this topic. I think the Grattan Institute, albeit 6 years ago, I think it's an excellent read. It's about within our system called Targeted Teaching. So I've got the link there. You can probably the slides will be made available to you, or it's a very easy Google search. But I think that it's probably worthwhile pursuing if you're interested. So last week, and don't stress if you weren't able to attend last week. It's just a little bit of a recap. We looked in detail at the gradual release of responsibility and how that connected. The main focus was the workshop model. There were some technical issues for us through YouTube around the recording. That has been resolved. So if you're looking for the recording, I think we can make that available to you. But we're building on. So gradual release, I will very minimally talk to this evening. Workshop model, I will be talking and referring to. When it comes to formative assessment, we've got 4 options. You know, our students can make something, they can say something, they can do something, or they can write something. That's the evidence that we can collect. Now, I'm going to say that really in literacy, more often than not, it's going to be our students saying something or writing something. It doesn't rule out our students making something or doing something, but a huge percentage of it is really around what our students say and what our students write. So if we're talking about formative assessment, we need to think about those opportunities. What opportunities within a particular lesson do our students have to talk and or to write, or both? So want you to keep that in mind. I think some schools do this really well in that it's part of their planning. You know, what evidence are we going to collect? And let's not try and collect too much. What are the main things that we want to get out of any particular lesson? All right, so the workshop model, that is what we covered last week. We went through all of this in detail. If this is brand new to you, I do recommend that you go back and watch the link for the local literacy leaders from last year, and or if you can access the recording from last week. I am going to use the workshop model structure of a lesson to kind of talk to the different elements. It doesn't mean that you need to follow the workshop model. I recommend it, but you don't need to as such. So just know, if you're brand new to this, that we start at the opening and we work our way around to the debrief. But I'm just going to talk to each element now around what really are the main things in terms of formative assessment that we're looking for. So in the opening, we're really talking about the learning intention and why are we learning what we're learning today. And, you know, key question for me is, do the students understand what we are doing today? Do they know where this lesson has come from? Ask them. You know, get them to read the learning intention. Get them to talk to each other about it. 30 seconds, you know, and then we are going to have explicit instruction to follow. But we want everyone to be active. You know, I talked about this last week, that in some settings, and this isn't a criticism, best job in the world, hardest job in the world, but it's almost like 10, 12 years ago, someone thought that learning intentions and success criteria was a good idea. So we all do it, but we don't know why. It's almost become a compliance activity in some areas. Learning intention success criteria are crucial because our students don't know what it is that we're learning today. So we need to make that really explicit for them. And really, I guess one of the things from last week and this evening is around thinking, that we're really getting our students to think, making them active in what we're doing. So I think that for me, that question is really important, as well as, maybe how does this connect to other things that we've learnt, do you think? They might not know, but at least we're giving them that opportunity to engage and to think. So the second part, mini lesson, this, we talked about this last week. This is where we enact gradual release of responsibility in 10 to 15 minutes, which is a challenge. We heard last week how some schools and educators ensure that they do manage that. Also thinking that we do gradual release of responsibility over the entire lesson, not just the mini lesson, and over the day, the week, the unit of study, the term, the semester. And I did joke until the end of time, but it's really at least until they graduate from us. But if we get gradual release of responsibility down pat, in conjunction with formative assessment, we can't help but get good outcomes for our kids. So within the mini lesson, it's formative assessment throughout. So I'll go back to, make, say, do, or write. We want our students talking. There's turn and talk, think, pair, share. Write down what you're thinking. And as teachers, as the educators, we want to use this information we gather to move fluidly between the different aspects of the gradual release of responsibility. Do I need to model more? Do I need to guide the instruction more? Get feedback from the students. Do they understand what it is that we're doing today? Then go deeper into the collaborative. Get feedback from the students. Be really explicit with them around what the gradual release of responsibility is. Are you ready to roll? Are you ready to go and work independently? Let them in on the secret. I don't think you definitely don't have to do what I'm going to talk to now. For me, I increasingly, in the lessons that I model, have the success criteria at the end of the mini lesson. And I co-construct it with the students in the classroom that I'm working in. I need to know roughly what I think that success criteria should be, but I'm going to ask the students, what is the number one piece of evidence you think you can show me today that's going to demonstrate that you've been successful? Again, it's getting our students thinking. They have ownership over this. So I think that's really, really important. And I think a really important question, and this sits outside everything, is what do students think assessment is? In the literacy data assessment and practice courses, that's one of the modules, part of a module. And almost to a student, when the participants in those courses ask students what they think assessment is, students say it's a test. Now, we want students to think that assessment is all the time. It's the work that they're engaging in. It's the things they say. It's, every minute of every day of every lesson. So we need to change mindsets within our students as well, so that they realise, and we need to act on it. And that really is the focus in this evening's webinar. Okay, so the next part of the workshop model is work time. This is where our students are going to work independently. And the key thing here, if we follow the model in this way, is that we're going to be conferring. And it may be that you might, in the Padlet, say, Danny, we'd love to hear more about conferring when we get to webinar 3 and the panel. And that is something that I'm definitely considering. So if I get a lot of feedback from you that is what you'd like to hear about, then I'm sure we'll be able to build some of that in. Like I said, you will hear from Francesca, from Frank at Camberwell South. You'll see her have a conference with young Teddy in Foundation. And I know this is Foundation to Year 8, but we've got 90 minutes. There's things that, I have to factor in. So we definitely can build more of that in to webinar 3. So in work time, in that first work time, if it's been set up really well, if we've used gradual release of responsibility, then our students are going to be working independently. You'll hear from educators tonight on the videos talk about that you need to set that up. Students, and like I said, one school's 11 or 12 years in. So the students, they are so familiar with it. Foundation students, they get it from day one. And that allows us, I personally believe the hardest thing to do in education is differentiate. And by doing this, it allows me to confer, work with students one-on-one. So not going to be able to go into conferring in huge depth this evening, but formal conferring should take between 4 to 7 minutes. And, we'll talk a little bit around what's the student's role in a conference, what's the teacher's role. One of the questions on the Padlet last week was, do you have a conferring calendar? I would be saying that's what you want to work towards. You want to build some flexibility in. How do we keep notes? The formative assessment after a conference. And for me, I've worked with lots of educators that have used technology, particularly probably Evernote is probably the standout. I'm a pen and paper person. That's just me. And I have an exercise book for every student. And, I write my reading conferences in one, going one way in the book. I flip it over and work back for my writing conferences. But I think, you need to find your own style with that. If you've got conferring going well, if you've got, most of your staff, all of your staff that have conference notes, I think that's what you want to have a PLC around. What are we seeing in our students? What are we having in our conferences as a focus, etc., etc. Bit blurry, sorry. I think the two best resources probably are these two in relation to conferring. In terms of reading, Jennifer Cerebello. In terms of writing, Carl Anderson. But what I do, and there's a lot of videos, examples in both of these resources. And what I do say to educators that I get to work with is what I've learned from both Jennifer Cerebello and Carl Anderson is more about my knowledge around reading and my knowledge around writing, more so than actually the art of conferring. I find that teachers are fantastic with their kids. We love our kids, we work well, we've got really good relationships, we understand them. I think the biggest challenge to conferring is setting up the structures in your room, but also sticking to the 4 to 7 minutes. I think the most common type of conferring I see in schools that are just starting out is that I have a conference that goes for 20 minutes. I have one conference per lesson, or I just roam. And while that's okay, the formal conferring that we get to really gets a lot more depth, and you'll hear more about that in the example videos this evening. So catch, we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but we're really good at this as teachers, to a person, I think, planned, unplanned, but really it is based on formative assessment. And as educators, we collect and act on a lot of formative assessment unconsciously. We might not even realise that we're doing it. And this slide might reinforce that. So misconceptions, if after my mini lesson students are working independently, I've done a bit of roaming, I might have had a conference or two, and I realise that there is a misconception, I'm going to do a catch. I'm going to time out everybody, hold up. When I said A, you all thought I meant B. This is what I mean by A. Or it can be to give feedback, class, we're on track, we're doing so well, keep it up. Or we're off track, we're a bit rowdy today, or you're not at your best. Let's get back onto it. Or I might want to single out a piece of evidence that I found that is just top notch and on the money. I also want to keep going back to the success criteria with my catch. And so that, students are thinking around, well, what is my evidence that I'm going to have today that demonstrates that I've met the success criteria? So the more work time, this again might be something that, I feel might be something that we want to look at webinar 3 in the panel. But in this space here, we've still got, in the workshop model, we've got so much time for students to work. And for me, this is where I recommend doing your small group instruction, whether it be guided reading, literature circles, reciprocal teaching, a focus group in writing, but it has to be based on formative assessment. None of this is criticism, because you will have heard me already say this evening, best job in the world, hardest job in the world. One thing I do see from time to time is, we have a group that's formed in term 1, and for some reason there's still a group, on, what are we, August 18. And I would argue that's nigh on impossible for all those students to grow at the same pace. And so we need to really make sure that our groups are formed based on formative assessment and that they're fluid. That, in our collaborative planning, in our PLCs, we're having these conversations and we're thinking around, is that strategy group or small group the best option for that young person? So yeah, I've talked to that second point there. And, what are the other students doing while I'm in my, small group instruction? And it really needs to be based on formative assessment to inform what the other students are doing. One of the things that was on the Padlet last week that, where does phonics fit? Where does phonemic awareness fit? Handwriting, etc., etc. Now, they're all options here. One of the challenges, and I think that is one of the purposes of this webinar series is for us to stretch. How can we set the bar a little bit higher? And one of those is that in some of the schools you're hearing from this afternoon, they have 3 hours of literacy a day, on a good week, and so they have the opportunity to meet all the needs and use the workshop as well as this. So in a lot of these schools, they do less, but they go deeper, and it works. So anyway, that's more work time. Lucky last is the debrief. I talked about this last week. All of the elements of the workshop model are super important, and I get to this part and I always talk about that this is the most important, when really they're all super important. But this is where it all comes together from the lesson. And I think the success criteria is our starting point. We want all students to be active. I'd be reluctant to have one student share to the whole group. I want all students active. They're talking in small groups, in pairs. And for me as the educator, I'm not necessarily listening to the students who I had a conference with or a small group. I'm listening in to those that maybe I didn't get to, or I know that I need to keep tabs on. And there's a range of ways that we can do this. So they've had a chance to share their success and their evidence. I'm going to ask them 1 to 5. Show me your fingers on how well you've gone today. 1 being you really battled, 5 being you smashed it. And then I'm going to cold call. There's some accountability here. All right, Danny, you gave yourself a 5. What's your evidence? And I'm either going to go change it to a 2 or a 3 or whatever it might be, or I'm going to hit the teacher between the eyes with the best evidence ever. Or it could be thumbs up on the side, thumbs down. Could be writing an exit slip, talking about the exit slip. We want to take notes efficiently. We want to capture this information, but we really need to do it efficiently. And then importantly, what do we do with this information? And we've got 3 options. I can use this information, if 80% or more of the kids haven't had success in the lesson, then I need to redo the lesson again. And 80% is probably a bit high. Some researchers will probably say 60%. I go with 80%. It's a rough figure. Do I need to pull together a small group? If there's 3 kids, 5 kids that maybe didn't quite get it or didn't get it to the depth I was hoping, then I've got the option of pulling them together, maybe in more work time tomorrow or the next day or whenever it suits. And then I've got to make a decision on, Do I work one-on-one, or do I do it in a conference, or do I do that in a small group? But without doing this, I actually don't know. And remember, Dylan Willems says, double the rate of learning if I use formative assessment. And I think success criteria is the starting point, but I also want students to think about, what else did you do well in reading or writing today? How did you go with an individual learning goal? That they learn the options, and so I need 3, 4, 5 minutes to do this. A couple of minutes to talk, a couple of minutes for me to tie in where am I getting the evidence from and getting the feedback. So that is a very, hopefully not too rushed version of the workshop model, and how how formative assessment is weaved in, and it is a bit of a broad brush. So at this point in time, I'm going to give you a break. So it says 5, but it'll be a 3-minute window. Like I said, have a toilet break, grab a cuppa, stretch your legs, get away from the screen, and or put in any of your thinking into the Padlet. But I'll see you back in 3 minutes. See you then. All right, welcome back. So now, probably the part that you've been looking forward to, or I hope, that we've got some videos, and the first one is from Coburn Primary School and how they tackle phonics. So we'll watch the video, then I'll talk a little bit. As you really want you to engage with these videos, and there's a fair bit to think about. And there are some things on the Padlet that I think I might talk to when we come back from our next break, which will be in around 15 minutes. So yeah, but keep the Padlet going. Any of your thinking, and I'll try and be responsive to that after the next break. But let's listen to Coburn Primary School, and in particular, Bree Flanagan.
We've got a whole school approach to teaching reading at Coburn Primary School, and we've got a particular approach that we use in the junior school around phonics. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we've been using the Letter Lessons and First Words book by Heidi Ann Mesmer. They've got a good scope and sequence that we follow from Prep to 2, and any others that need it from 3 to 6, they can follow it as well. So we use the assessment guide as well. We assess them each time and follow it up from there.
Bree, you mentioned that we assess the students using the assessment tool that's provided in the book. From there, how do we go about informing our teaching?
They all sort of started on the first letter cycle, which was what's in a name, and then from there we kept on assessing them, and as they changed we adapted and created focus groups from there.
So Bree, you spoke about using a summative assessment at the start of the year and then using focus groups on a weekly basis. Talk to me about what the focus groups look like.
So each week we do a formative assessment to guide our teaching and learning from there. We can see what the letters they've learnt and to see where their point of need is from there. So we have different groups and they're learning different sounds or different words whatever stage they're up to.
We've talked about the assessments that you use and then the fact that there's focus groups that follow that assessment. Tell me a little bit about any of the activities that might be happening during a phonics lesson.
So usually we all start on the floor and have a whole group, whether we're reviewing the sounds that we've learnt or just an introduction to the new sounds or whatever we're up to. And then we go into our independent time at the tables. Some of the things at the tables we use is like the alphabet chart, we can use that. They have lots of whiteboards, lots of writing, the magnetic letters. We have letter banks so they can practice with a partner. We have this one game and it's all the letter cards, and they have slap it, so they love that. They use the fly squats and slap it and say the sound or say the name, or alternatively we also use the words and they can sound out the words if that's what they're up to. And I think at the beginning of just getting the children to do it over and over so they can become independent. And now it's at the end of the term, it's quite easy. I can put something on the table and they know what's expected and what to do. So that gives me the time to be with the focus group and, you know, teach to their point of need.
The school's developed some picture and word sorts. Tell me about those.
Yeah, so we've got the pictures for the letter lessons, and they say the word and listen to the first initial sound, and then they sort them. So that's one of the activities that's used a lot, and the children practice saying the words, and they can sort them into the correct letter or the sound that they're learning. When it goes into the first words, it's sorting the word and the picture as well, so connecting those as they're sounding them out. We try to get at least 5 exposures to the sound that they're learning that week, or whatever, whether it's the word or the word family that they're learning. So we try and get 5 exposures per week, whether we implement it into our reading or our writing or into our phonics lessons as well.
We've just completed another assessment. Tell me about what type of growth we've seen.
They're progressing at different stages. A lot of them have exceeded my expectations. It's fantastic to see some of them reading words already, and yeah, I can see them going a long way by the end of the year. Still, a few of them are going at a different pace, and that's okay, but we're still teaching to what they need. And it was great to do the formative assessment each week. It was quick, a couple of letters just to make sure that they know, but I was able to see how far they could actually go and how much they've actually learnt. So it was really good to see where I can push them and where their point of need is.
We've got.
Okay, so thank you to Bree, foundation teacher at Coburn Primary. So probably just a few key points. I'm probably not telling you anything that, phonics itself is one of the most controversial aspects of education. And I'm not going to engage in that this evening in the webinar, other than to say that, I'm yet to find a school that doesn't teach phonics. But what I would say, in terms of the research, and there's a lot of people who use their own arguments to suit, is the key thing from research is that instruction needs to be explicit and follows a scope and sequence. And I keep coming back to the schools that you're hearing from in both last week's webinar and in this evening's webinar, are really emerging or have absolutely outstanding results and have sustained those for a long period of time. So they're the schools that we want to look at for what they're doing, and so I really tend to try and not engage in some of the discussion around it. But the key thing here is differentiation via assessment and having a lesson structure that allows for differentiation, i.e. the workshop model. So, and that is where programs probably do fall down. In saying that, phonics, the knowledge required for educators is vast, and often programs support educators in that knowledge. But where it does fall down is probably in that lack of differentiation. And the resource that Bree referred to by Heidi Ann Mesmer is relatively recent. I think it was 2019 that it was published. And, I think the assessment is the key part. There's some really good activities relating to where students come out based on the assessment. And I guess the other thing that I would say, for Coburn Primary School, who we're looking at, they have a large EAL contingent, and it wasn't that long ago that their SFOE was 0.8, so putting them in the top 20% of disadvantage in the state, and yet their outcomes are tremendous. The other thing is, I did talk to this earlier, that some of these schools, including Coburn, work towards 3 hours of literacy a day, and that was something that came up in the Padlet last week. So how do you fit everything in? And I would say that you want to do less and do it well, and try and integrate, but get the core parts right. So I've already talked to that, but that's probably the key things that I'll talk to in relation to that. let's go to Woorayl, and they've got an overarching focus that they're sharing around how they look at reading in terms of formative assessment.
Independent reading time. We are conferencing with our kids, taking notes on their ability to decode words and use the strategies that we're working on, but also their ability to understand and comprehend the books and how engaged they are at that point as well, and how they're tracking. Obviously in foundation, a lot of that begins at their ability to decode words and solve words, but does definitely build into a comprehension focus as well. Those conferencing notes are so important, and we continually refer back to them on a daily basis. We bring them to planning and use them to inform our whole class lessons, but also what we plan for our guided reading or any small groups. As a team, we are forever going back over that data that we've collected to reflect on how our lessons have panned out, but also to track how our kids are progressing. And often that means that we haven't moved on from something as we've planned in our planner for the following day, because we found that most of our kids aren't quite there.
The observation checklist is used throughout the school year, particularly in term 1, and it is used to assess student engagement during the readers workshop. So a teacher would set students to read independently, and then at regular intervals throughout that reading time, the teacher looks at the behaviours, the reading behaviours that the students are demonstrating. So it's looking at whether they are actively engaged in their reading, whether they're distracted, and if they are off task, what is it that is causing them to be off task. The teacher then takes that observation checklist and uses it to analyse what exactly is happening with that student. Is it that they're reading texts that are at a level that's too hard for them? Are they not having books that are engaging for them? Are there things within the environment that are distracting that student? And then we move to act on the analysis that's taken place. So the next conference that we might choose with that student would be based off the information gathered from the observation checklist. So if it is that a student's not reading the right book, a teacher would then plan to confer with that student and make sure that we're helping them and supporting them to have a book in their hands that's going to build their stamina and build their engagement during reading.
One of the formative assessment tools we've used is a spreadsheet, and this spreadsheet included a photo of, at the beginning of the year, of our students' book boxes, their behaviours checklist, their reading engagement survey from the beginning of the year, conference notes, also included summative data, but really we used it formatively. It gave a real snapshot of each student as a reader, and a really great reflection for me at the end of term 2 when we reassessed. We also took photos again of the students' book boxes, and in comparison to the beginning of the year, it really allowed us to identify some trends in our kids' reading behaviours. Particularly for my grade, I noticed that a lot of the kids had lots of novels on the go at the same time. So for me, this was a clear picture that we needed to reassess this, do a couple of mini lessons on selecting books, and also we had a huge lack of non-fiction, so we were able to identify and correct this with mini lessons.
The core purpose of formative assessment is to improve student outcomes. It's important to allow the data to drive and alter the direction of the current lesson or sequential lessons based on student understanding. As a school, we aim to merge the variety of formative assessment tools to create a mosaic of the child. In reading, we collate all of our forms of assessment to understand a child far beyond just their fluency and engagement.
This led to a range of outcomes. We slowed down in our literacy instruction to ensure that we explicitly taught students about being engaged. We purchased rich literature from Foundation to Grade 6, and we informed our professional learning as well as reached out to our consultants.
Making sure that our formative assessment is listed in our assessment schedule. So in our assessment pyramid, we make sure that we have the summative assessment. That's the assessment that most people feel comfortable with. But inside of that, we make sure we have our formative assessment as the base of our assessment, and it is listed as to when we use it, what we use it for, the reason behind why we use it, and when we administer it. Generally, our formative assessment is ongoing, but we make sure that each teacher knows in our assessment schedule this is valued and it is on there timely. It can also be on the need of your class, but there is definite times that you need to have that assessment done, and you need to be able to bring it to planning. You need to be able to bring it to meetings. Using our formative assessment through planning is something that we do every week. So we have got a common planning hour for literacy, which is an hour. Each team has got an hour where one of me as the assistant principal, I go to that literacy planning hour, and so does one of our coaches. So through planning, we need to make sure that we're bringing our formative assessment, our conferring notes, our observation checklists, so that we can see where our students are and make sure that we plan our lessons within our unit, but we plan our lessons so that they're covering off aspects of what we are noticing through the formative assessment that's taken place in the Readers' Workshop.
Okay, so there you have Woorayl Primary School and their approach to reading, and you heard them talk about a spreadsheet, and that is where they've really modified their assessment schedule. You heard Flick talk about that, to ensure that formative assessment is built in, as well as built into their planning around what they're going to be collecting. And for me, that is one of the themes that needs to weave through this, is that we need to do less in schools and focus on the things that have the biggest impact. Nearly everything works in education, but if we try and do everything, we actually water down what it is that we can achieve. So let's focus in on the things that have the biggest impact, and formative assessment is that. And it's really important to be responsive. So I guess you heard there that, you know, through the information, the formative assessment that they're gathering, that leads to lessons being adjusted and modified in terms of what the whole class need, but also how small groups are formed, what an individual might have in a conference, as well as PLCs, and then, you know, having that access to coaching. And we're talking about differentiating for our students, but we also want to differentiate for our staff. All right, there are a few questions in the Padlet. Keep them coming. We're going to watch one more clip, then we'll have another break. When we get back from the break, I'll try and be responsive to the questions that are in the Padlet. But let's listen to Fiona from Kewarra and Secondary English.
We found that explicitly verbalising our thinking has enabled students to think more deeply and discuss their own thinking in more detail. As teachers, though, the mini-lesson modelling has made us think about our expectations of students and has helped us differentiate our teaching and learning activities even further. During mini-lessons, students are always provided with an opportunity to respond to the mentor text using the reading strategy that has been modelled. It's usually a short task, often using sticky notes to record thinking, but this provides teachers with valuable formative assessment as we move around the room while students are writing or discussing to gain an understanding of the level of mastery of each student. Based on this formative assessment, we're able to form strategy groups for students who may need further support or extension. At the close of the mini-lesson, most students are expected to apply the reading comprehension skill to their own text and record their thinking in their reader's notebook. Another really valuable piece of formative assessment.
All right, thank you, Fiona. So we are focusing in on English here. There is a question in the Padlet around across disciplines, so I will talk to that when we get back from a break. But in terms of English, and I suppose it does apply to all disciplines and learning areas in secondary, is the predominant classroom environment is still, I guess, that stereotypical traditional focus on content. and we definitely have units 1 to 4 that we need to be considering. But in years 7 to 9 in particular, there is scope to do things a little bit differently. There was, some talk last week on the Padlet around conferring now and around behaviour and those sorts of things. So I think possibly, it's chicken and egg in this case. Behaviours in secondary can be challenging depending on the context. But often it is, if we are able to confer, if we do allow students to have student agency and choice around how they're learning and what they're doing alongside explicit instruction, then it can be a bit of a positive cycle that does take time. But I think it's well worth the effort. Otherwise, we're always just going to keep getting what we've always got. It is important, though, if we do have a traditional secondary classroom in English, that, it's all well and good for me to talk that maybe we need to change things up a little bit. But what's the alternative? There is an increasing amount of resources out there that are practical. I think Kelly Gallagher and Penny Kittle's text 180 days. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So 5:03. So we've got 2 videos to watch, which are well worth watching. So stick around. A few questions. First question around work time and how do you monitor the students that maybe you're not engaged in conferences with? So I think probably 3 conferences is what you would probably, you might be able to sneak 1 more in, depending if you're teaching in a higher year level and they're working for longer. I think we need to, if this is all brand new, remember that these schools have been doing it for a long time. So the students are really familiar with what their role is in this, and there's accountability. There's accountability at the end of every lesson, but they're also having a conference each week. I'm monitoring, and you'll see with the example here of readers' notebooks that there's some real accountability here. So I think the other thing is to, you still have the opportunity to check in with students. So if I'm sitting with a particular student and having a conference, before I have my next one, I might go and roam, or I know certain students that I need to be touching base with, or they might be sitting right near me. And I think, again, when you watch Frank have a conference with Teddy later on, you'll see how motivated students are to engage in the work so that when they do meet with you in the conference. And then what I talked to last week as well, I think maybe you need to see it in practice. If you, and COVID permitting, and when the operations guide allows us, there were people who wrote to me this week around seeing it in action, and I'm happy to broker that. Next question was around conferring template. I think that you want to make it your own. Frank has emailed me. Thank you, Frank. I can't share that as we're going on the fly, but it is probably something that we'll include, I'm thinking, in the panel for webinar 3. I think what's really important is to have the date that you're having the conference with, what the student is doing well, what are possibilities for them to improve on and what they might work on, what they're going to go away with a goal. So I think there are some key things, but I think there is still room for individual style there, and of course, whether you're using technology like Frank does, or and a lot of people do, or whether you're pen and paper. So hopefully that does that some justice. In terms of the secondary question, across disciplines, so there, at the start of tonight, I talked about the Basto Literacy Suite, new course this year, Enhancing Literacy Across Secondary Disciplines. Highly recommend that maybe, enroll in that for next year. Again, people might want to write to me. There's some readings around disciplinary literacy. Having originally been secondary English and maths teacher, I think that from time to time, maybe we could have, literacy across the curriculum's been around for 20 years. Maybe it hasn't always been done as well as it could have. Disciplinary literacy is a bit of a game changer, and regardless of what discipline you teach, seeing the opportunities that are present for you, there's a lot of new research, recent research that is quite practical that I think is a bit of a game changer. So hopefully I've done that justice. I think, again, leading literacy is the key course, I think, for you to enrol in. It's primary and secondary. It's ambitious, and that is where a lot of all the schools that you're seeing tonight and last week have been heavily influenced by. Let's get to Clarinda and hear what Erin and Eleanor have to say about Readers' Notebooks.
Formative assessment is a core aspect of our work with the workshop model. There are a number of tools that we regularly use for formative assessment during Readers and Writers workshops, including student writing folders and writers' notebooks, readers' notebooks, and conferring conversations and the notes from those. The workshop is structured in such a way that it allows you to use your formative assessment every day to differentiate your teaching and target instruction to the individual needs of every student. In first work time, teachers and students engage in one-on-one conferences, which allow the teacher to work directly with that student on their personal reading and writing goals, discussing progress they've made, showing evidence that they've been working on their goals, and reflecting on what their strengths and areas for improvement are. In second work time, teachers are able to take focus groups of students, whether they're set groups of students that they see every week, such as guided reading or literature circles, or flexible groups that allow the teacher to invite different students to join them at different times, like strategy groups. All of the formative assessment that we do through the workshop allows these conferences and groups to run as effectively and efficiently to suit the needs of every student as the teacher can. Readers' notebooks are an essential tool in our Readers Workshop. They're the place where students show their thinking and learning, record their reading journeys, and can see their own progress from one day, week, or month to the next. In Readers' Notebooks, we want our students to be writing not just what they know about a book that they're reading, but what they think and understand. We want them to connect together all of their wandering ideas from their reading and reflect on them in a way that helps them form new ideas and new understandings. One of the ways that we do this is by teaching our students lots of different ways to write in their Readers' Notebooks. We show them thinking tools like mind maps, T-charts, and Venn diagrams that they can use to help organise and reflect on their ideas. We also teach them different ways to begin their entries, like starting with an interesting phrase or line and reflecting on it, or expanding on one of their sticky notes that they tracked while they were reading independently. Students have a lot of ownership and responsibility over the work in their Readers' Notebooks. It's the place where they need to show evidence that they have been working on their goals in between conferences. So they can do this however it suits their goal. But part of the expectations for being prepared for the next conference is bringing evidence of their work in their Readers' Notebook to show their teacher. It's a really important tool for the teacher and the student to use to be able to reflect on how they're going and what they can work on next.
So differentiation is a really important part of the workshop model, and we use our Readers' Notebooks to give us a lot of the formative assessment data that we use. So for example, I might notice in looking at my students' Readers' Notebooks that 3 of the students in my class really need to work on their use of book logs. So then it becomes an option for me as the teacher to run a strategy group on that in my second work time with those students. Another example is I might notice through looking at my students' Readers' Notebooks that there are 4 particular students who really need to work on expanding their reading diet. Then I could form a different strategy group with those students in my second work time. There's lots of flexibility for those focus groups in second work time, which is one of my favourite aspects of the workshop model. We also use the workshop model to differentiate for students' needs all the time. So we are differentiating in our one-on-one student conferences and also in our focus groups. And focus groups happen in second work time, and there's a lot of different variety of focus groups that we can have that are all based on formative assessment data. So we have guided reading, we have reciprocal teaching, literature circles, and also strategy groups.
Working in PLCs, professional learning communities, has provided our teachers with more opportunities to look at student data together and make changes to our instruction based on the current strengths and areas for improvement in student understanding. Readers' notebooks have been one of the main tools that we've focused on in our PLC work this year, and teams have taken the time to read through their student notebooks on a regular basis and discuss what they notice in them. They've then worked together to create inquiry cycles based on the specific needs for their students and to come together regularly to assess how those inquiry cycles are going, what they need to change or implement in their teaching in order to help students continue progressing. This really valuable tool has meant that our readers' notebooks are not only getting stronger in terms of what the students are putting in them, but are being used more effectively by our teachers to inform our instructional practice. In order to implement and embed the use of readers' notebooks in our school, we've done lots of different professional development over the last couple of years to help us get to the level where teachers are confidently using readers' notebooks with their students now. We started off originally doing lots of PD looking at examples of readers' notebooks. We did short professional readings about what readers' notebooks are and what can be included in the entries. And then teachers had the opportunity to start implementing them with their students and experimenting with them and just getting to know how students could use them and different things they could do. We then last year used the text Notebook Connections by Amy Buckner as a professional reading for our staff book club. Staff read a chapter at a time and we came together to discuss our thoughts and what we could apply or implement from it. PLCs have been a really valuable tool with this, as it allows specific time for teachers to look at their notebooks and discuss their observations of what students can do and then put that directly into their planning with their teams. The collaborative nature of PLCs builds the sense of collective teacher efficacy and shared responsibility for all students to progress and achieve in their learning. One of the highlights for me from PLCs has been observing teachers looking at student data and then hearing the conversations that they have around their students' strengths and areas for improvement and discussing the ways that they will or that they want to address these. I've loved seeing teachers changing their planning based on what they observe or thinking, hey, we need to do some more research about this thing to get stronger at it. That we're working on at the moment too is creating examples of what we think a strong reader's notebook looks like. We're in the process of creating school exemplars to use for moderation in assessment and to use as worked examples for teaching that can help both teachers and students to recognise strong thinking and responding in readers' notebooks. We want to create tools like Bump It Up walls that can help students know what success looks like and to see their own strengths and what they can do to improve the depth and quality of their own entries. This is also a tool that teachers can refer to in conferences, mini lessons and focus groups to show students what they expect and then to work with them on how to achieve it. All of these tools going together are going to make the readers' notebooks in our school even stronger and help our teachers and our students to be more confident with using them to grow as readers.
Thanks to Erin and Eleanor. So some of the key points here, I think Erin and Eleanor both explained it really, really well. I think is finding time, within our lesson that we actually devote the time and are really explicit for our students around what it is that we want them to do when they make an entry around a reader's notebook. It is the key piece of evidence. Now, we've talked a bit about conferring, and now we're talking about readers' notebooks. When we have PLCs and when we come together, we want to use these data sets together. What is it showing? And then with Wooray's video, they're using what's in students' book boxes. What is their student survey saying about their beliefs around reading? What do they like? What are their interests? Is this reflected in what is going on? That sort of mosaic. So finding time to model and have that explicit instruction around what we're looking for in the readers' notebooks, including it in planning. We've talked about PLCs a lot. Readers' notebooks really demonstrates, that depth of thinking. Do our students have that depth of thinking? It's one thing to talk about it, which is really important, and we want to do that. But by going to write about their reading, really reflects the depth of their thinking. And it really does, obviously, that's a primary example. It does set the students up to have success when they go to secondary. So that went very quick. So this is Camberwell South Primary School, and we're going to hear from Lauren and Francesca about writing.
Formative assessment at our school, at the beginning of the year, we have collected lots of data, lots of low stakes writing. That could look like a writing survey, so we gauge ideas about what the kids' interests are, how they feel about writing, their strengths, their passions, to help us with our planning. It's also letters to teachers, so they'll write us a letter at the beginning of the year so we can see what their writing skills are like.
Formative assessment in the prep classroom during a writer's workshop generally consists of writing conferences one-to-one with the kids. In my room, I've got a schedule where the children are broken up into different days of the week, and that is permanently on the whiteboard. They know what day they are conferencing, so they generally all come quite prepared to the floor with a writing pencil, their alphabet strip, their writing book, and within their writing book is their current goal. The purpose of our writing conferences are to touch base, for me to see where the kids are at, but also for the children to set with me a new writing goal. We have a look at a current piece of writing, and we have a flick through some previous work as well. And then I ask the child what they're finding they're doing really well, because we always start with celebrating a positive, and then we have a look at something that they might need some help with. Usually in the prep room, they tend to struggle to come up with something they're finding a bit tricky, so that's where we work together to come up with their goal. We use these writing goal stamps in the classroom, so the kids know that, for example, their writing goal might be to generate more ideas, so we would then stamp that into their book. Before they begin their next writing lesson, the kids are asked to have a look in the front of their book and check what their most recent writing goal is before they start writing, so they've got that fresh in their head. I also take notes either during the writing conference with the child or after, and then I collate all of that information in one document so I can track the child's progress month to month. Then with that information, I'm able to target some kids who might have a common goal that they're all working on. So I might, choose 3 or 4 children to work on the floor with, and then we can work on that together with a quick, short, sharp focus. Otherwise, that also helps to inform some planning for our mini lessons. When we come together as a team in our PLCs, we have a discussion. If we notice something quite similar, then that helps to inform our planning. Can you tell me what you wrote about the Lego challenge?
It is rough, bumpy, colourful, and scary.
Awesome words, Teddy.
And it's an alien, and I write it next to it. Lego alien.
Awesome, Teddy. I love these words. Tell me why they've got a circle around them.
Because I have a circle around them, so we know where the adjectives are.
Good boy. And the adjectives were the describing words you used for your Lego. Tell me what they were again. Colourful and?
Colourful, scary, and bumpy.
Love it. Love your work. Good work. Teddy, can you tell me why you've popped this at the end of your sentence?
It's a full stop, so we know know where I stopped.
Excellent. Can you tell me, when we look at the front of your book,
Yeah.
what your goal is that we are working on at the moment?
Having good ideas and using lowercases.
Awesome. Okay, so let's have a look. How do you think you are going with writing using your lowercase letters now? How do you think you're going with that?
I think I'm going pretty good.
Pretty good. Still finding it a bit tricky?
Yeah, because it's easier to do uppercases more than lowercases.
Yeah, it is a little bit easier, but you know what? I'm looking at your writing, Teddy, and look at all of these beautiful lowercase letters that you've got. Gorgeous G. Lovely O. Look, you are using them. You're doing a really good job. Teddy, with your ideas, have you started to think of more than one idea, or are we still writing just one?
I'm thinking about over one a little bit, two.
So do we think that maybe we could keep working on our ideas so that you can tell me in your writing more than one idea? Can we keep adding? So with your writing about your Lego, where you said that it was colourful and scary looking, maybe you could tell me a different idea about your alien. What else could you tell me? Where did he come from?
Out of space.
That's a great idea. How could you put that into a sentence?
The alien lives out of space.
Well, let's count how many words that was.
The alien lives out of space.
How many words?
6.
Great job. All right, so then maybe that could be our next sentence. All right, so I think with your goal, Teddy, we should keep working on thinking of more ideas. So we'll put the date next to that one. And I think that will be the one that we keep working on. Sound good?
Okay.
Great.
So big thank you to Francesca and Teddy and to Lauren for the video that they sent in from Camberwell South. So just some key points. Common language to discuss writing is really important for students and staff. I think the conference off the top of my head, I said earlier is 4 to 7 minutes. Often in foundation it can be shorter. So that I think it's around 3.5. I think it's a fantastic example. You can see how Francesca's really strength-based, telling Teddy all of the things that he's doing really, really well. It's we're in term 3. He understands what his goals are. Even though Francesca refers back to them, and I think there's really high expectations there, which I think are great examples for us. So just really wanted to say a big shout out to all of the educators who sent through videos, and even those that I couldn't include. We were, again, shout out to Reed Clark, who helped produce the videos. There were some videos that we just couldn't fit in because of the week turnaround. But thank you to all of those educators. Hoping that you can join us in 3 weeks' time for webinar 3, where we have the panel. If there are things that you would like to see or included in the panel, please put them in the Padlet. There are a number of resources or things that I've talked to this evening that you might want to talk to, you might want to contact me about, and I'll get back to you. There was a question on the Padlet around PLCs. So in terms of time, so the schools that we're hearing from, they're playing the long game. If you ask them, they're all, there's nothing special about them in that regard. They don't have extra time. They're still very time poor, but everything is focused on teaching and learning. They don't have too many initiatives going on in the school. They try and align everything. So whatever our professional learning focus is, that's more often than not the evidence that we're looking at in PLCs. That's the focus of learning walks, in coaching, etc., etc. and they play the long game, you know, and the Basto Literacy suite of courses is really reflected in that. And, you know, I think leading literacy is probably the key one, but all of those courses do have the long game in mind, and it is that culture of there's always more to learn, and schools send subsequent teams, team after team, to these courses so that we're all talking the same language, and it does take time. And, you know, best job in the world, hardest job in the world. But anyway, again, huge shout out to the educators that, you know, were prepared to share their fantastic practice. Touch base with me if there's anything that I can help you with. But yeah, really do hope that, you know, we get to see you at webinar 3 on Wednesday, September the 8th. But I'm a tiny bit ahead of schedule. So that's it from us. Whether, you know, you're in lockdown or not, take care of yourselves. You know, yeah, be kind, and thanks for joining us this evening, and I hope you enjoyed. See you, everyone.